Okay, why don't we get started? Thank you for coming, everybody. My name is David Correia. I'm a professor of American Studies at UNM, and this is a public lecture series, part of a class that I'm teaching called Police Violence and Social Control. I'm going to just briefly introduce the series and make one other announcement. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jack, who's one of the students in the class, is going to conduct an interview with Sam Costales, retired officer with the Albuquerque Police Department. I want to, first of all, right now, John Dunn and Nora and I are handing out a flyer for an event a week from Saturday. A group in town called APD Justice that emerged out of the anti-police violence organizing last summer has spent the last 6 months preparing a People's Tribunal on police violence in Albuquerque. This is a tribunal that will be held at 1 p.m. On Saturday, March 14th, just north of downtown. The address is on the flyer. This is a public tribunal to do what the Department of Justice investigation didn't do, which was to consider racial bias and prejudice in the patterns of police violence in Albuquerque. So investigators from APD Justice have spent the last 6 months interviewing homeless people, people who have largely been ignored in investigations of police violence in Albuquerque, and then the tribunal will consider the findings of that investigation. So please, if you have any questions about that tribunal, I'm happy to answer those after the lecture today. Also, before I turn it over to Jack, too, I wanted to just say a word about this lecture series. This class has been, I guess, maybe 6 months in? 6 weeks in? We're about 8 weeks into the semester. This is the second lecture. Next week is spring break at the University of New Mexico, and when we come back from spring break, there will be a lecture every Thursday till the end of the semester. Those lectures are not all in this room. There's a flyer. I am remiss in bringing copies of the flyer, so let me just, you can follow me on Twitter, and you can get the list if you want, at David Correia, UNM. But in 2 weeks from today, in the Santa Ana room, which is on this floor, Ken Ellis and Mike Gomez will be here talking about their experience. Both of their sons were killed by APD, and they've agreed kindly to come and talk to the class as well. And then there are 5 more. New Mexico Senator Jerry Ortiz-Pino will be here. Alma Rosa, the director of the UNM LGBTQ Resource Center, will be here. Chris Banks and Paige Murphy from Answer, New Mexico will be talking about anti-police violence organizing. Public Defender Alan Wagman and City Councilor Ray Garduno will be here toward the end of the semester. And lastly, Nancy Kingsburg, an attorney with Disability Rights New Mexico, and Peter Simonson, the executive director of the ACLU New Mexico, will be here as well. So please look for the flyer and come to those. Those are all open to anybody. And this is a pretty informal lecture. I split the students in the class up in groups, and one of the groups was responsible for moderating these lectures. And so they, among themselves, selected which lecture they would moderate. And today, it's Jack's turn. Jack Cox is a junior at the University of Mexico, student in police violence and social control. He's majoring in business at the University of Mexico. He'll be doing the moderating, and we really want to leave a lot of time for questions. So at the end, there'll be time for questions, and Jack will moderate that. And I'll let Jack and Sam further introduce themselves. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. All right, so first of all, we're just going to say thank you, Sam, for showing up, and we're going to basically get started. So we have a couple of questions for you today, and you just answer them to the best of your ability, and any details, anything you have for us, the more the better. Fair enough? So, first of all, the students in our police violence class have read an interview you've given and are familiar with your work. You've become a prominent public critic of the Albuquerque Police Department. For the benefit of those who aren't familiar with you, could you start by hearing a bit from you on your background. How and why did you become a police officer? How long were you with the Albuquerque Police Department, and why did you leave?
Well, first I was involved in nursing, and I was getting my LPN. I was going to go for my RN. I found out I was colorblind at the time, but I found that there was a treatment for colorblindness, so I decided to try out the police department because I'd always wanted to. So I tried out and I made it, and I entered the police academy in October 5th of 1981. And I worked a full 20 years as a police officer, and I retired in October 19th of 2001, so I did exactly 20 years. I mainly stayed in the field as a field police officer. I worked 1 year as a detective in the impact team. I was TDY to several places, Vice, and a couple other undercover areas. But mainly I stayed as a field police officer in uniform and in a car handling calls for service. So the bulk of my experience is going to be as a street police officer.
Mm-hmm. Now you said you grew up in Albuquerque and you always kind of dreamed of being a police officer. So what made you want to be a police officer?
Well, when I was a kid, I'd see police officers drive through my neighborhood, and I'd always respected them. I sort of looked up to them. So I always wanted to be part of it. Didn't want to be state police, didn't want to be Burlington County Sheriff's Department. I wanted to be APD. So that was the only place that I wanted to apply for, and that's the only time I wanted to be a police officer was as an Albuquerque police officer.
That's good. So after 20 years, was there a specific reason why you left, or did you just retire?
I did my 20 years.
You did your 20 years?
I did my 20 years, and I saw a lot of things that I didn't agree with. And so I retired at 20 years, and that was it for me. I didn't want to go back, and as was mentioned in the article, I was having a retirement party, and many of my friends and police officers were there, and they asked me, what was the biggest regret you had as a police officer over the 20 years that you were a cop? And I said, without pause, or without hesitation, I said, because I regret that I didn't say what I saw. I didn't come forward. I didn't have the guts to step forward and say all the misdeeds that I witnessed as a police officer, witnessed other police officers doing. And I'd like to preface everything by saying I never hit, kicked, slapped, or punched any person I ever arrested. I never saw a need to. That wasn't my job. My job was very clear to me. It was to make arrests when I had to, but not to administer any punishment as part of that. And so, in saying that, I made it clear what kind of cop I was going to be when I started my career. And then after the academy, of course, you learn the different things in the academy. But when you first step foot with a training officer, is when you sort of get a real idea of what your job is going to entail.
So since you've left the APD, you have turned around and basically criticized the Albuquerque Police Department. Can you explain why you've come out now after you left?
Well, part of it, when I came back, they asked me, I went back to work in surgery as a scrub tech at that time, after I retired. And the police department asked me to come back to work because at that time, Mayor Chavez had that big push for officers. So they called me up and said, well, they offered me a job in radio, taking police reports over the phone. So I thought, well, that would be good, but as a civilian. So I was doing that. Then they started asking me if I would come back to work as a full-time police officer. I said, absolutely not. I don't want to do that anymore. And the third time they asked me, I said, okay, I will come back as an Albuquerque police officer to fill your numbers, but leave me in radio. Leave me where I'm doing some good. I answered, I took police reports. There's two of us. We took nearly 400 police reports a month over the phone. And we'd ask questions of people calling in, and we would give them the answers they required, because a lot of dispatchers, 911 officers, 911 operators didn't know the law, so they really couldn't talk to the public. So we were doing that. And I said, if you leave me in radio, I will come back as a police officer. I did. That lasted for a year until Chief Schultz took over. Then he decided he was going to put us back on police cars. answering calls for service. So he pulled myself and the other officer out of there and put us back in full uniform and answering calls for service, assigning me to Westgate. When I came back, I had that regret, and I thought, well, now I've got my retirement, so I'm safe. So whatever I witness in the future, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut anymore. So while I was out in the field, we had an incident where an officer got in a fight with a subject. The subject pulled a gun on him or something, and he fled in the vehicle. He chased the vehicle, and I heard the call go out, so everyone starts moving towards the area of the chase. During the course of the chase, the subject was firing a shotgun at the pursuing officer. So we knew this was a dangerous situation, so I was headed from the Westgate area, and they were now headed on Blue Water, approaching Unser, where the chase was, and I was about a course in Central at this time. The suspect apparently was turning the corner, attempting to reload his shotgun, put it between his legs, and as a result of that, blew his head off. We didn't know that. The car crashed, and they automatically set up perimeters. And I volunteered to be at an outer perimeter in Central and Unser. And I sat up there, and an additional APD officer showed up. I don't know who he was. And about 3 sheriff's deputies showed up. They would, at times, assist us with perimeter situations and things like that. So while we were there, I would notice when people try to go through the roadblock, as they do always, I noticed that I would come up and tell them, there's a guy up there, he fired at police officers, you need to turn around and go the other way. And they would accept that as an explanation that immediately you turn around and leave the area. The sheriff's deputies, of course, they'd run up to the cars and they'd, get the hell out of here, get the hell, turn this car around, get out of here right now. You're yelling at people and things like that. And so I was noticing this, but later on during the course of this whole thing, I saw a pickup slowly making its way on a dirt road that was parallel to the roadway. And the deputies immediately ran up to the vehicle and started yelling and screaming at this person. And the man was, just trying to reason with him, trying to find out what was going on. And they told him, turn around, and so he got out of his truck, and he was trying to talk to the police officer, said, turn around, get your truck, and leave. He got in his truck, he made a U-turn, he started to drive off, and I heard him say to the deputies, you guys think you're gods. And with that, the deputy said, that's it, you're under arrest. They flung the door open of this moving vehicle, grabbed, he was an elderly man, threw him out onto the ground, into a sticker patch, face first, started knees, elbows, the common thing the police do, and roughing him up pretty good. There goes his driverless truck headed toward Central. So I yelled to the sergeant that was there, he's a deputy sergeant. I said, you've got a runaway vehicle. So he ran up and retrieved and stopped the vehicle and went back and commenced to rough up this person, later to be identified as Al Unser. As they picked him up and were walking him back out to the car, I recognized him as Al Unser because I've lived through all my life. I said, isn't that Al Unser? And they said, I don't give a fuck who he is. Threw him in the back of his car and he drove off. And that bothered me. And so I got back in my car and I thought about it. The lieutenant called and said, a PIO wants to talk to you. At that time it was John Walsh. And he said, so when the PIO called me, he said they want to find out what's going on. I told him, I said, that arrest was false. I said, they brutalized that man, and it was a false arrest. He didn't do anything wrong. The PIO said, we don't want to hear about that. Just forget about that. And he dismissed it, totally dismissed it. So I went to lunch with the fellow officer that I was working the radio with, and I said, what would you do? And he goes, I would not say a word. You know what will happen to you if you say something about this. I said, yeah, but I've got my retirement. I'm safe now. So I thought. So I went to the lieutenant. The following morning, I went to brief early, went to his office and said, this is what's going on. This is what happened. They arrested this man. But backing up a little bit, that night it bothered me. So I made a call to Bobby Unser, anonymously. I told him, I witnessed what happened to your brother. I'm a police officer. I don't want to come out right now because of what may happen to me. but I'm letting you know I am a witness, and I saw what happened to your brother. And so the following morning, I went and talked to my lieutenant, and I explained the whole situation to him, and he was somewhat of an, on my side of this whole thing. He said, "You told me," he said, "so if and when it goes to court, you tell the truth like you've done." I said, "Okay." So with that, apparently Hunter's attorneys got wind of this, and they contacted me and interviewed me and realized what I had saw was helpful to their client. So they interviewed me. They let the DA's office know that I was a good witness for them. I was going to be testifying, and they might want to consider dropping these charges against them. And they didn't, and I went to court, and I testified. I testified after the sheriff's deputies testified. And I noticed at the back of the room, they were whispering to each other, and one stood up and very quickly exited the courtroom. And later on that afternoon, I found out that he'd gone to the sheriff, Darren White, who in turn had gone to my chief and told him what I'd done. He said, "Your officer just testified against 3 of my deputies, and now this guy's going to walk on it." Following day, in the newspaper, there it is. Officer's testimony riles police chief. And the judge had issued with that because the Tribune, or the Journal the next morning, showed a picture of the judge holding that paper in his hand saying, "This is ridiculous. This trial is still ongoing, and they're already intimidating witnesses that we have in this trial." Chief said he was going to investigate me, number one, because I testified in uniform for the defense, which I'd never heard of before in my 20 years as an officer. Number two, because I had not reported it on my chain of command, which I had that day. So both those charges were very quickly done away with. Then it started from there.
Wow. Well, let's go on to our next question, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. By our count, APD has killed nearly 100 people since 1985. You've been at APD during almost that entire period. Can you help us understand this pattern? Why is the use of lethal force so much more common at APD than anywhere else? The New Yorker story reported that APD killed people at rates far greater than LAPD or NYPD. What explains this, and why has it been going on for this long?
Well, I really don't have the answer to that. I know each individual officer has to make their own decisions. I know that they're very, I don't say excited when they hear of a person with a gun. They're very excited about these calls. Just in conversation with officers, you can more or less tell what kind of person they are. If they find this excitement to where they actually, to me, it seemed like they wanted to kill somebody. I just couldn't understand where they're coming from with this. They were really into guns. They wanted to go to SWAT teams. They wanted, there's things that I wasn't there for.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell us of the culture of APD? And like you're saying, that it seems that guns seem to be a permanent part. So what can you tell us about the culture of APD and its officers?
Well, as far as the guns are concerned, everyone wanted to get a 45. That was your gun of choice. Go out there and get a 45. You're not a cop unless you carry a 45, which I did not. I carried it for many years, and then carried a 9mm later on. As far as the culture,
what can you tell us of the culture of maybe using excessive force when it may not be used or needed?
Well, that happened all the time, and that happened each and every arrest. If you ran from an Albuquerque police officer, the end result would be that you would get a beating after that once they caught you. So often, in fact, when I was first out of the academy, I just been released my last training officer. I had 2 training officers. And it was my first assignment. We got a lot of party call, and we're walking down the street towards the call, and just a person was walking away from the party. The officer I was with called that guy over for no apparent reason. The guy wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just walking down the street. And he said, "Hey, you come here." And the guy looked at him, just ignored him, continued on his way. He said, "I said, come here." And the guy takes off running at that time. Well, I'm fresh out of the academy, so I'm a pretty good runner. So I ran about 2 or 3 blocks to chase the guy, and I got the guy. And when I caught him, I put him against the wall, and I was patting him down, and I was going to put his hands behind his back. And the primary officer showed up in his car. He never ran. He went and got his car against him. And he showed up there. He was in a blind rage. He flung open the door. He came out right past me, grabbed the guy, threw him on the ground, and just started kicking this guy in the face. And the guy would cover his head. He'd kick him in the stomach. He'd cover his stomach. He'd kick him in the head. Wherever he was opening up, he'd kick him. So I grabbed him by the arm at that time. And I said, John, I don't want to say names. I said, stop. And he threw my arm off. He was just in this rage. He was like he couldn't even see me. He grabbed the guy, picked him up, handcuffed him, threw him in the back of the car, and drove off. And that was it. Left me, I had to walk back to my car, of course, but this was common practice on arrests. When they caught the person got a beating. And this guy was brand new too. He was out of the class before mine, so he only had 6 months on me when this occurred.
I was wondering if we could get some water for Sam. That might be possible. All right, so somebody's going to go get that. Thanks for going through that. So, going back to the culture of APD, were you ever discriminated against because you didn't use excessive force by other officers or leadership?
Thank you very much. That was actually near the end of my 20 years. There was an incident. This was May of 2001. I was retired in October. And there was an incident where an officer called out that a suspect had just robbed the Doghouse, which is a restaurant in 12th and Central. And I was moving into the area as backup again. And I saw the guy, and he was running towards me, so I tried to block him in my car. He ran around my car. I got out, and I started running after the guy. And he's running towards Gold or Silver on the streets. And there was a city truck going down the street. And I motioned to the city truck. I said, block that guy. So he pulls in front of the guy, and the guy comes up to the truck, stops, reaches, looks in the back of the bed, and picks up a big steel pipe and runs around the truck and starts hitting him between 2 houses. So I pursued him in between the 2 houses, at which time he stopped and turned on me. And so I immediately pulled my gun out, and he started advancing on me. I said, drop the pipe, drop the pipe. He wouldn't drop the pipe. And at this point, I don't know what I was thinking. I thought, I've been on almost 20 years. My goal wasn't to kill anyone. I made a choice to holster my weapon, which the officer that was behind me saw, and I pulled out my mace, and I hit him in the face as he was coming near to me, and it worked. He dropped the pipe, I grabbed him, put him on the ground, and handcuffed him. And as soon as we were handcuffed him, the other officer says, why didn't you shoot him? I said, because I wanted to see if I could do something else. He goes, you should have shot him. You had every reason to shoot him. You should have shot him. I said, I didn't want to shoot him, okay? And I let it go at that. So he takes him, it's his arrest. He takes him, puts him in the back of his police car. It's not running, no air conditioning on. Puts him in the back and leaves him in the back seat. Now, this is the end of my career. I never put up with this kind of crap the way they treated prisoners. So I took the guy out of the car and I put him underneath the shade tree. And he goes, what the hell are you doing? I said, it's hot in your car. The guy's roasting to death. I said, I'll watch him. We'll put him on the curb in the shade and let it go at that. And you do what you need to do, to take the report and stuff. And I transported him to the substation. When we got to the substation, I put him in an interview room. And, it's on Thursday, so was I, because we've been running. So I said, would you like a Coke or something? He goes, yeah, I'd like a Coke. I said, okay. So at that time, the detectives were behind me, and they're walking in to interview. And they said, he goes, wait a minute, did you get a what? I said, well, I'm going to go get the guy a Coke. He goes, this is the guy that just tried to kill you with a pipe, and you get to go buy him a Coke. By this time, the other officer had already told him that I didn't shoot him. And I said, yeah. I said, he didn't kill me, and he's thirsty. So I'm going to go get him a Coke. So I was teased about that, chastised about it for not killing him. To me, it always appeared that APD had a criteria that if they met this criteria, they did this, they did that, you shoot them. And it was sort of cut and dry. You know, they met the criteria, you kill them. You have every right now to kill them. Like it was an honor or something to kill them.
That's very interesting to hear. It seems that we're cutting up a little bit, so if you'll hold the mic while we finish the rest of these questions, that'd be fantastic. So we'll go into how are you trained to deal with specifically homeless people and people with mental illnesses? And what are the patterns did you see during your career regarding how APD treated those homeless and mentally ill?
Well, I'm going to be, when I was with my first training officer, I was working downtown Albuquerque, and we had a homeless person sleeping in front of the business. That was a call. We went there, and he said, "I'm going to let you handle this call." I said, "Okay." He goes, "Go ahead and get this guy moving." I said, "Okay." So I went and said, Sir, can you wake up? You can't sleep here. You need to move on your way." And he watched this for a few minutes, and then he's like, laughed a little bit. So let me show you guys that. So he put his foot over the homeless person's ankle, and he held his PR-24, which is a nightstick, like you would a golf club. And he swung it as hard as he could and hit this homeless person in the bottom of his foot. Needless to say, this homeless person stood straight up, sheer pain. And he said, "That's the way you wake up the homeless." I thought, wow, what did I get myself into? So that began it. And I'm not going to tell you that, the homeless can be a pain sometimes. And we'd have to move them on. And I would try to, when you're with a training officer, you sort of have to, do it their way, be rude and hateful and stuff like that. But I dealt with homeless throughout my career. And there's many times I've befriended some of them, Sometimes I didn't even give them money, I'd buy them lunch. But, overall, they're not treated well. They're considered a pain because they're usually panhandling and things like that for money. Whereas with James Boyd, he was what we wanted from the homeless, to move away from bothering people and just move away and just mind your own business. That's what he was doing when he was shot and killed by these guys. He wasn't being a bother at that time to me.
Yeah, it would seem that APD views them as a problem more than anything else, more than human beings, in fact. Is that kind of what you would say?
Yeah, in fact, the prior to the press being released that video, my son-in-law, who's also a police officer, sent me that video on his phone, on my phone, and he said, "What do you think of this?" And he showed me the video. And I said, after I watched the video, I said, "I think I just witnessed a murder." And he goes, "Yeah, I sort of agree with you."
We'll go on to the next question. One of the criticisms you've leveled against APD is similar to one of the criticisms leveled by the Department of Justice. In the DOJ's April 2014 investigation of APD, it concluded that APD fosters a culture of aggressive policing. You spent 20 years at APD. Can you help us understand how that culture of aggressive policing developed, and also what it is like for you personally to work at APD? Just finish it up.
Well, I believe the culture of aggressive policing, that's actually part of it. But I think APD sort of made a left turn along the way when we just started bringing rehires. When they're trying to bolster their numbers is when things really started to go awry, because they started, there was a time where we had 30 odd open space officers. Open space officers, they tried to make the police academy, and for one reason or another, they couldn't make it into the police academy. Now, when they started pushing for all these officers to be full-time police officers, just with one wave of the magic wand, Chief Schultz made every one of those officers an Albuquerque police officer, wearing our badge, carrying our gun, and doing everything we did. In fact, I was assigned some of them because I was a training officer. And we would have to teach them how to write police reports. And then various other people just applying to the police department would not make it for one reason or another. And they would go to smaller police departments and then lateral over into APD, sort of backdooring the process. And so that's when I started to see a lot more violence from officers that didn't know what they were really doing, didn't know how to deal with people, just major problems with many, some of the trainees I had, stuff like that.
Very interesting. I guess at this point, unless you have anything else you'd like to expound on, I think it'd be good to go into a Q&A.
Sure.
Let me ask the first question.
Okay.
We're waiting for this. It was interesting you're talking about sort of the retribution that you've experienced. So the young man that was arrested and put in the hot car. I mean, Nora and I were in a paddy wagon. It was about 250 degrees for about an hour. And I wanted to talk about retribution. Nora experienced that. I experienced that. Nora's had cop cars follow her. I had police officers in my driveway in June. And actually, a KRQ reporter called me a few weeks ago and said she did a story critical of APD and suddenly there were cruisers in the driveway. So, has this happened to you? And how is it possible that it's happening now, after all this attention on APD, that they're still engaging in this pattern of like intimidation and retribution?
Yeah, it is happening now. I was just telling David about what's going on right now. There's obviously I'm not liked by a lot of police officers, so I frequent a restaurant that a couple APD officers frequent, and there would be the dirty looks to each other because they don't like me and I'm way too much for them. And they would spend 2 hours. These are school resource officers assigned to Cibola High School. They're both rehires as well, and they would spend up to 2 hours in the coffee shop, making it uncomfortable for, I guess, all three of us. So I called their sergeant. I said, has APD changed? What are they giving for lunch breaks? Because you have 2 school resource officers that sit in a restaurant for 2 hours at a time. And he goes, I know you. You have a hard-on for APD. He said. I said, no, actually, I don't, and do in many ways. But I said, my issue was they're spending 2 hours in a restaurant. Is that okay with you? He goes, well, if you have 2 hours to sit there and watch my officers, he goes, then feel free. I said, well, obviously, it's not an issue with you, so I'll leave it at that. So that was the end of that. The following day, those same 2 officers were in the restaurant, and this time they spoke to me. They never speak to me, but they spoke to me this day, and they said, good morning, Sam. I said, good morning, Officer Brown. And he goes, you be sure and have a very nice day. And I said, yeah, I'll try to do that. You too as well. And they're leaving at this time, and as they're walking out, they go, well, have a good day. And I said, yeah, you too. And oh, by the way, hands up, don't shoot.
Yeah.
They don't like that phrase right now. So I said that to them, and they left. And as they were leaving, they talked to 2 other, I'm not sure if they're retired police officers or current, but they were in civilian clothes, and they told them, I heard him tell them what I had done, that I called their sergeant and reported them. So they left, and I was on my bicycle. I ride a bicycle, so I was on a bike ride. I take off from there for my bike ride, and during the ride, I got 3 very quick calls in quick succession, so I thought it may have been an emergency or something. So I pulled over, and I called the number, and it was the Flying Star restaurant, the one I frequent on a daily basis. And I called I asked them, is anyone there calling me? I said, I don't know their number. I've never called them. And they obviously don't have my cell number. Because the person I spoke to said, no, nobody's called you from here. I said, okay, that's fine. And then we got to another point, and they called me a total of 7 times that day. Finally, I picked up the other end, and it was a person. He was trying to sound like he's black. He's saying, "You, Joe, bro, you hit my car." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Yeah, you hit my car here at the Flying Star restaurant." I said, "No, I didn't." I said, "I'm on a bicycle. I'm not even in a car." And he goes, "Well, I'm going to make you pay for that." I said, "Well, do whatever you need to." So I called the Flying Star back again. I know the manager, and I said, "Did you guys call?" I said, "I keep getting calls from your number." He goes, "No, I haven't." So that ended that day. Then the following day, I was in the restaurant, seated there, having coffee, and I got another phone call from the same number. So I immediately ran up to the number and he said, "Is this your number?" He goes, "This is our number." "Yes, and no one's calling from my restaurant." I said, "Okay." So I realized what they'd done. My son-in-law died. I said, "What they're doing is they're spoofing the number. They're using that number to call you and harass you." So I said, "Okay, well, that's enough of that." So then I was driving over to my cell phone company to see if I could get a copy of the records. And I get another call, this time from a female, saying that I had sexually assaulted her and that she was going to have me arrested. I said, "Okay, well, who are you?" And she goes, "Well, I got the police on the line right now." I said, "Oh, really? We'll put them on." And she says, he says, "Yeah, this is so-and-so with AP." He didn't really give a name. He said, "This was the police department," he said. And he said, we're going to put out a warrant for your arrest." And I said, for what?" And he said, "For assault, harassing this lady." I said, "Well, we'll arrest her then, but we're going to arrest you in the 509, which the number doesn't exist on the police department." So I did that. I was like, "Okay." So the harassing phone calls began, and I tried to put an end to it by going to the substation. I was going to file, I called around. They said, "We can't call APD to file a police report because they're not going to do anything. You need to go to the FBI." So I was going to go to the FBI, but I needed the officers' names and man numbers. And I went to the North Valley substation, and I walked inside and asked them for the names and numbers. They refused to give it to me. They said, "No, we're not going to give, you can't do that. You have to go through the sergeant." I said, "Well, their sergeant's the one I have issue with." Because he gave them my number. I said, "So I'd rather just get the information from you. I don't want to go across the street to get it because it's Lobo we're across the street." I said, "You know there's going to be a confrontation." I said, "So can you just give me that?" And he goes, "No, we're not going to do that." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm giving you last warning because we're going to go across the street." So he gets on the radio right away calling for units. And so I walked across the street and I walked in there and I filled out the visitor form and I said, "I'm here to just get their names and man numbers and I'll be on my way because I'm going to go to the FBI office and I'm going to internal affairs and then I'm going to a news station." And as I'm going into the administrative offices, Officer Brown confronts me at that point, says, "You need to leave." And I said, "I just need your name and your partner's man number. That's all I need from you." He goes, "You need to get out of the room right now. Step out of the outside." I said, "Okay." So I stepped outside and I said, "Now I need your name and man number." He goes, "You know my name." I said, "What's your first name and what's your man number?" I said, "Can I borrow your pen?" He goes, "I don't have a pen." I said, "Okay." I'm going back in to get a pen. He goes, "If you step foot back in there, I'm going to arrest you." I said, "Do what you have to do." And I walked back in, fully expecting to be attacked at that point. I was not. By this time, there's 4 security guards, the other officer, and Officer Brown's behind me, saying, "PD, start me another unit, a supervisor. I have a subject in here refusing to leave." I said, "Really?" I said, "You're saying that on the radio? You're lying on the radio. I'm not refusing to leave. I want your names and numbers. I'm more than happy to get the hell out of here because I know what you guys will do to me." So I wrote them down. I walked out very quickly, got in my truck, and I drove to the FBI office. And that's where that is right now. It's in the middle of being investigated. But
when was this incident?
just recently, 2 months ago maybe. It's still ongoing. I was just interviewed by the civilian oversight person. But when I went to internal affairs, I went to the FBI office first. They more or less told me, "We're not doing anything about this." They said, "Well," he goes, "We can't really do anything with APD. They sort of do what they want. This was FBI agents telling me." I said, "Really?" And I said, twice in the conversations they said, "No, you're not getting it, dog. We're going to get you." I said, they made threats against me. And he said, "Well, that can be construed in many ways." I said, "Oh, okay." So I said, "I see where this is going." I said, "Well, I'll go ahead and go to internal affairs in from here." And with that, I stood up and said, and let me tell you something, Agent. I said, if I don't get any resolve with internal affairs, then I'm going to get them. He stood up out of his chair and said, you just threatened them. I said, no, I didn't. By what you just told me, you said that cannot be construed as a threat. How I get them is going to be my way. And I went from there to internal affairs. But it's ongoing. This is what I'm saying. The arrogance of this police department know what they've been through with me. We've been through federal court. I beat them in federal court, and they still have the arrogance to come after me that quickly, that fast, without any thought about it, and to think they can get away with it. And they will get away with it. I guarantee you they'll get away with it. Because all they have to do in internal affairs ask what needs to be done to give these guys a polygraph. I said, that could lay to rest once and for all who's telling the truth here. I said, I'll be glad to take one. Just let them take one. Only the chief can order a polygraph. So we know where that's not going to go.
Sam, I got a question, and I'm not sure if it's the microphone that's too loud, but I'm going to put that down because I don't need a microphone.
What it is when I got arrested, and the question is basically they put us in a paddy wagon, then handcuffed me with a plastic tie, got a little bit of nerve damage, and left me in there for at least 30 minutes in the paddy wagon. Came out drenched, and it's all in the photos with the journal, I believe it is. The question was, are they this brass that they actually can, first of all, they were following me. I reported it to the DOJ. Then the DOJ told me, hey, stop following her. And they decided to start escorting me. And I had one behind me, one cop in the next to me, the other one on the other side of me. And of course I'd wave because I already knew them all. But what it is they actually have been going in front of me and braking and expecting me to rear end them. But I was a school bus driver, so I have defensive driving on my side. And so each time they put the brakes and I'm coming right behind them, I automatically stop on a dime. But one incident happened where the officer, and this was a state cop, police officer, excuse me, actually got off the ramp, parked right in the ramp area, and I was coming off the freeway at 45 and slowed down on a 35 turn. Thank goodness I was a good driver. I just barely skinned by him. And by the time I passed him, I was almost at 10 miles an hour. So this is how, really, I can't believe that is how they can actually do things like that and not even bat an eye. Where if I would have wrecked or skinned him, wrecked into him, I might have been in trouble because I'm with ABQ Justice. And the fact that I'm ABQ Justice, if one year thing happens to me and I'm on parole, or not parole, probation. I'm on probation, so I've got to watch my P's and Q's. And then when I did take a court date, what they did was they told me that they were going to add on a couple more. When I was in front of the judge, add on a couple more charges. And so I had to take a plea. So, needless to say, I'm having to be good for 6 months. So they are that brass. Sam?
Yes.
You agree with me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Costales. I do sympathize with your position because I did take 2 officers to court and I did lose. So, and I sincerely hold it to you here. My question is, Mr. Costales, I'm presently attending the Citizens Police Academy. And Mrs. Saavedra is heading the police academy. I was sitting on the North Valley Citizens Police Committee until I was removed by the mayor's representative to not allow me to continue on the committee due to the fact of my background check, which I was never informed the background check was going to be done until the committee had already inserted to 4 months. I did meet with Human Resources Director. I got responses. I did get a copy of my background check. And the reason why I was removed was due to a DWI citation in 2003. However, prior to that, I had been accepted through application and through a non-interview process by the mayor's representative to sit on the committee. I was the only Hispanic that was sitting in that committee. However, I firmly believe that the reason why I was being excluded from the committee is because I wanted to direct the committee in this direction. I started asking questions about standard operating procedures. Could you please guide me while I'm attending the Citizens Police Academy? Because I'm not getting any responses from Mrs. Saavedra at this point from the first meeting that we've had. Where is a written copy from beginning to end, inclusive of the tacticals for standard operating procedures that a citizen has full view of, that an officer has to follow? I have been guided by city attorneys to say that if I want a copy of it, I have to go to APD's site and pull them. It is impractical to pull that document because of all the sublinguals. I've asked for an index of interpretation, and no police officer in the stakeholders meetings that I attended have answered that question.
I couldn't answer that question. I don't know how to get a hold of an SOP right now.
The reason I ask is when I was directed to file a police complaint, the citizen's complaint form states to be as thorough on your complaint. But you can't be thorough on the complaint if your complaint is based on the standard operating procedures of APD. It doesn't make sense.
I agree.
So I have one other question. May I, sir? I had met previously with the Citizens Oversight Committee, and the time that I met with them, I had one question for them. How many of them had ever been arrested by APD? Not one. I have asked through emails of the individuals that have been directed to sit on the Citizens Oversight Committee, the new one, Police Committee, how many of them have been arrested? It's been asserted that they do have a retired police officer, but there seems to be an imbalance to that committee that's taking place for the very purpose of the DOJ agreement. Do you think it's essential to have somebody that has been arrested and has gone through several processes against APD to have a voice based on actual anticipation and activity with APD, other than the psychological blends of it?
Yeah, I think that input would be welcomed, but I think my input would be welcomed as well. I mean, but they would judge me based on my activism lately, to not allow me on that oversight committee. So I think they sort of just pick and choose who they want. I would hope they'd get some people who have experienced the other end of APD and not just the good side. And it takes experience to know what it's like to be harassed, arrested, anything by APD to understand.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm working with David and ABQ Justice to prepare the tribunal that he spoke about earlier. And for part of that, we've been collecting testimonials from people on the street who have had negative encounters with APD officers. There was one story in particular that really affected me. We spoke to a woman who told us that she had been raped by a uniformed officer in his police car less than 4 blocks away from a substation. I spoke to this woman at length, several of us did. We all found her story to be very credible, and there were certain details that it just didn't strike me that somebody would make up. I think that she was telling the truth, that this actually did happen to her. And the fact that it was less than 4 blocks from a substation suggests that other officers would have been aware that this kind of behavior, that these kind of things are going on. So my question is, in your 20 years at APD, more than 20 years at APD, were you ever aware of officers committing sexual assault or rape?
Yes, I was. In fact, I used to go to a shop that I just knew the owner of the shop, and we talked. It was a car, he worked on cars, and his cousin showed up one day and said, my girlfriend stopped by APD, and the officer said that she had a warrant, which she did not. And he told her that if she gave him oral sex, that he would let her go on the warrant. I said, really? And he goes, is that okay? I said, no, it's not. I said, did you get any information on the officer? He goes, well, we got a car number. I said, perfect, that's a car number, okay. I said, I'll take that. So I went to Internal Affairs, and I gave them that car number. I said, this officer is pulling over women, telling them they have warrants, and asking for sexual favors in order to do away those fictional warrants. And the detective, because at that time there was detective, now it's just fully sergeants in there, but the detective goes, it's just his word against hers, or his word against this officer. He goes, I'll take the information and let it go at that. He didn't do anything with it. This went on. They started receiving more and more complaints about this same officer doing the exact same thing to other women. And he called me back this time to interview me again about this situation and put me in touch with the female who had reported this. And they found out this officer was doing that, and they fired him, terminated him. But I came to him early with this information and let them know this officer was doing this. They dismissed it and let it go on how many other women had to be abused by this officer before they finally fired him. I believed it.
But they didn't bring any criminal charges against him, they just fired him?
They just fired him. They just handled it administratively.
Yeah, I got a question on, I too retired from the Army. I did some public safety work too. And I know there's a lot of good people out there that do the right thing. But coming back to Albuquerque, I have never got in trouble. But what is the stance or the command operational tempo with APD and Native Americans? Because I see a lot of abuse out there and nobody does anything about it.
Well, they're sort of treated exactly the same way the homeless are in many cases.
Yeah.
And like I always tell people, when police departments say they don't profile people, they absolutely do profile people. We all profile people, I profile people as well, so I could tell you I didn't. That was part of our job. They say it's not, but it was. That's many of the ways that we had to achieve our numbers was to profile people. Like at the end of the month with tickets, arrests, things like that.
It seems to me that it's a common fear to have the military use police. And I guess I would like to raise this question in terms of what do you think would be the ideal career path to become a policeman, as opposed to using the military as a way to become police?
That's part of the process I'd like to be a part of, would be the application process of police officers. I'd like to ask them a question. I'd like to ask them, why do you want to be a police officer? And you're going to get the generic response, oh, because I want to help people. But that in fact is not why many people want to become police officers. They want to become because of maybe the excitement of being a police officer, maybe the power of being a police officer. I think the military may sort of be a problem. You know, they take that military experience and looking as people as an enemy versus looking at people as as a person you stand shoulder to shoulder with. And you're a police officer, you're there to protect those people, and you're there to stand with them to enforce laws and to arrest the bad guys. But that's not the way the police department's looking at people nowadays. They look at them like you're the enemy, and it's us against you. And we were taught in the academy, don't trust anyone. I mean, I'll ask you, if you ever are encountered with a police officer, have an encounter with a police officer, and he touches you, what happens? What can you do? Nothing. What if you touch that officer? Battery on the police officer. That fast. Battery on the police officer. You know that. And you wasn't even dressed like a police officer. Those are the things. I mean, so we're tired on our traffic stop to assume everyone is armed, everyone is guilty. And I used to try to put a common sense approach to everything. I tell my trainees, I said, when you approach a car, if you see a man, a woman, 2 children in the backseat, a car seat, you're not going to treat them the same way you walk up to a car with 4 gang member appearing persons. You're not going to treat them all the same. You have to use your common sense. And that's part of the application process. I'd like to see what kind of common sense does this person have? What is your true reason for becoming a police officer? Is it to carry that badge and have that power over people? Is it to have that authority over people? Because as a cop, I didn't use that power. I never did. I used arrest as the last resort and not as a first resort. I wouldn't falsely arrest people because I'll tell people over and over again, yes, fear the police because they have the power to kill you. But more so, and what more so is used on a daily basis, is the power of arrest. I mean, I tell people all the time, when you're stopped by the police, I say, number 1, know your rights. Number 2, assert your rights. If the cop knows you know your rights and you assert them, then they're going to be more hesitant to abuse you. If they think you know nothing about your rights, you know nothing about the law, they're going to take advantage of that situation. And I say, assert your rights to a point. Because if you go beyond that point, it's called contempt of cop. You piss off the police officer. He will make up any reason in the world to arrest you. And they'll do it. And so I think the abuse of power is probably the most prevalent and the most dangerous thing a police officer possesses. They're usually the least educated, but they're given the most power. And I could have arrested anyone in the city if I wanted to, because I had the power of arrest, and I think cops on a day-to-day basis use that more than any other power.
Thank you. Jonathan Block, I work for the David Lobo, and I wanted to ask, in relation to the story that you told about the officer asking for sexual favors, being fired, but no criminal charges being brought. I wondered if you have an opinion as to what the importance is of having criminal charges be brought against police officers who are found to be abusing their powers and violating rights. The DA here in Albuquerque is trying. She's taking a lot of flack for it, and I just wondered what your opinion was on how important it is that these officers are not only just fired or disciplined, but actually treated like everyone else under the same laws.
Well, that's what I think we're all trying to move forward to, is to have the officer held accountable. Financially, I'd like to see him held accountable financially. If it impacts his family. If he gets sued and the city covers him, he's not out anything. I think it should be to the point where the city will cover the police officer to a point. Once he oversteps his authority, once he crosses that line, they will say, we no longer will protect you at that point. But they continue to protect the officers even after they've committed some of the worst deeds possible.
My name is Chris Dio, retired Navy. Also went to State Police Academy and got injured, so I didn't make it to the whole course. My one question, I know that State Police, they didn't have an issue with recruiting of people. They did nationwide recruiting. And my question is, with APD, are they really having a recruiting problem? Because it seems like every day in the newspaper, between the mayor and the city council, all they're doing is throwing money to keep these officers that are been in forever, or 19, 20 years, and just throwing more and more money to keep them instead of being more aggressive recruiting? Do you think they're not recruiting as aggressively as they should be, or they're just trying to use this to raise their money and get a higher retirement for the ones that are there now?
Well, I think they'd like to keep the experience in the police department, but I also think, the recruiting techniques right now, I can't see why a lot of people want to become a police officer with how they're being looked at right now across the nation. And like I said, I'd like to be part of the hiring practices. And I'd like to help pick out potential police officers, because there are good police officers. And what's stated over and over again is there's a few bad apples. That's not true. There's more bad apples than there is good. The good officers are afraid to come forward. They're afraid to step forward, because once you do, you're gone. And that's why I keep telling people, if you, at any point in your career, you decide to tell on that officer, that's it, you're done. If you're 5 years on, that's where your career ends. If you're 10 years on, so I had to do it, make it a way to where I can get through my 20 years. I had to witness many things, but I was just as guilty as the rest of them. I kept my mouth shut. And until you get officers that want to come forward and make that step, because once you make that step, you're gone. You have no friends in the police department. You have very few friends anywhere, actually. But I'd like to see a day where the organizations we're trying to form now is where police officers who want to step forward, the few good ones that are out there, where they have a soft place to land, where they have someone to talk to, where they have other officers who've been through what they can empathize with what they've been through. With people who understand what they're going through. And that's what we're working towards, to making an organization that's nationwide where they can turn to call, even if they're active. Active is very dangerous. If you're active, you've got to be very careful what you do.
Back here. Hey Sam. Anthony Rodriguez, student in David's class. And I kind of hear you talking about it now as sort of solutions that you see coming into play that you've already thought about. And so I just wanted you to maybe expand more on some solutions that you were thinking about. You mentioned training. I think there's some leadership solutions possible, and there's political solutions. So where do you kind of see a few of those that you've thought about that could really help fix things?
Well, the first solution I talked about was letting officers know they have a place to come forward to if there could be turncoats like that. Secondly, in the academy, just sort of change their training in the academy, what they're taught, and not so much being taught us versus them, but go back to community policing, sort of decrease the militarization they're doing with the police departments. I mean, New Mexico has the highest amount of military vehicles in the nation, followed only by Texas. And so the changes we're trying to make are just little incremental changes that may be seen on the forward, seen in front of you. They're putting on the show for the DOJ. I think it's all window dressing. I think it's all smoke and mirrors. Yes, it's window dressing. It's a big show because you have a mayor, you have a chief of police, and you have a police union that say nothing's wrong with our department. We're only doing this because the DOJ is making us. If you don't recognize there's a problem with your department, there's no way you're going to address those problems and solve them. Now, I'm not as optimistic as many people and think that crossing the blue wall of silence, that will remain. When I came out in 1981, it was there. When I retired in 2009, for the second time, it was there. And it will be there long after they bury me. It'll be there. Because that culture within the police department, behind the scenes, is one that I don't think can be broken. And the strength of that is given by their unions. The unions are really the biggest problem with the police departments around the nation, because they will put into place what the rank and file do to officers. They're the ones that give what I like to call rewards for shooting a person. They give them a $500 check to go spend it somewhere. I'm trying to make it to where they reward officers for good behavior. You've gone arbitrary, it may be, but you've gone 2 years without getting a citizen's complaint. You've gone 2 years without getting excessive use of force complaints. We're going to give you $500 for doing a good job. instead of offering rewards or bounties. I mean, they can be looked at bounties. What are these looked at? $500 to kill a person. Officers enjoy it. Oh, I get 3 days off if I kill a person. Jesus Christ, are you really saying that? Is that really coming out of your mouth? You know, so those are some of the things I'd like to see. I don't know if I ever will. When I did what I did, and I testified against the deputies, it was a union who set it in motion what happened to me. They immediately came out on their website and said, Officer Costales is a rat. Don't trust him. If he shows up at your calls, kick him out. Don't give him back on calls. They were writing this stuff about me. They didn't know me that well. And so this was the union secretary saying, go after him. We're not protecting this officer. So the union who's supposed to protect the police officer is the one that sets in place how you're treated once you become a rat.
Any other questions?
Hey Sam, thanks you so much for speaking publicly. Such courage on display today. Such courage. I need to get emotional. Where are the other rats? You know, I love rats today. So if you call yourself that, but why, with all the attention we've gotten in the New Yorker and Rolling Stone and DOJ, is anybody else going to stand up and speak publicly like you have?
No.
Like someone who's already got their retirement?
No. Like I talked about the few good officers. I worked with those officers. I know the good officers. We would work together. We would seek ourselves out. We'd look for each other. Of like mind. We're like-minded officers, so we bid together. We go to our different area commands together. He bid for these days off. I bid for those days off. These officers are out there. Many of them are retired. Some are rehires. But they won't come forward. They won't even talk to me about this because they don't want to be blanketed by me because I'm outspoken against the police department. But there are a few good officers out there, but they're just afraid to come forward.
And one other question, have you ever felt like your retirement was going to be risked?
No. Once I got my retirement the first time, I knew that part of it was safe. I truly, I guess I was naive in believing that coming on after I got my retirement and you know, speaking out against police for what they'd done that day, I actually thought that they would do anything to me. But they came after me just that quick, you know, and that's why I say even now, even after everything I've been through the police department, they'll still come after me. And it's sort of like you get to the point, who do you turn to? You know, if I need the police, who do I turn to? When I was right before the trial, you know, I'd already quit the police department after everything they had done to me, and I was having problems. And then my sister called one morning and said, "How are you doing?" You know, I called her actually. We had a rough night. I had to fight with my wife, and she left, and all that. But and I was drinking at the time, so I got pretty drunk that night. And I said, yeah, sometimes I just feel like taking a long drive off a short bridge. Well, with that, she hung up, and she thought, well, I'll help my brother out, and I'll call APD. So I'm sitting at home, and the doorbell rings, and I think it's my sister coming over just to check and see how I'm doing. I open the door, 4 APD officers push their way in. And I said, wait, what's going on here? And they just came right in, and my dogs started barking at them. They immediately went for the guns. I said, wait, you're not going to shoot my dogs over this. I said, what the hell's going on? You're suicidal. I said, I'm not suicidal. They go, yeah, you told your sister you're going to kill you. I said, no. I said, I'm not suicidal. I was a CIT officer. And part of the criteria for taking a person forcefully away from their home is they have to say, yes, I want to kill myself. They have to make that statement to you. If they don't make that statement, which they many times say, no, I never said that. You know, I'd say, okay, well, I'd leave them. As a CIT officer, well, they sent two CIT officers, a patrol officer, and a sergeant. And I said, they go, well, you've been drinking. I said, well, yeah, it's my house. I can drink all I want. You need to take a breath test. I said, wait a minute. They forced me to take a breath test. I took a breath test and showed some level of intoxication on it. And they said, well, we're going to take you in. I said, for what? They go, because you're suicidal. I said, I'm not suicidal. I said, my wife, we had a fight last night, we left, I drank, yeah, all that, that's all true, but I'm not suicidal. And the friend I keep telling you about that I worked with in radio, I got him on the phone. I said, will you talk to these guys? So he tried talking, he got back on the phone, and he said, they're taking you, and they're taking you by force if they have to. So don't fight them. Like, Jesus Christ. So I said, okay. Sergeant Hoisington, Lance Hoisington, I asked him, and I'll give his name because I don't like him. I said, Sergeant, I said, I was a police officer for 24 years. I said, will you at least give me the courtesy of not handcuffing me in front of my neighbors? And he said, you're cuffed and stuffed like anyone else. I said, okay. They took me into Casement Hospital, and they put me there in the psych ward. I stayed there for 4 days. It was the worst nightmare of my entire life. It was scary. And finally, a psychiatrist came and said, you don't need to be here. I said, I know. The police department's punishing me again for, because they know the trial's up and coming. So they're doing what they can do to intimidate me for not testifying. And so I was there for 4 days at Casement Hospital before they finally released me.
I'm speechless to what you've gone through, and I hope you inspire others to step forward. Thank you so much.
We have time for one last quick question, if anyone has one.
Who fed your dog?
My sister came over. Yeah, I called counsel. Don't everyone help me out again? Don't call it APD.
On that, we'll end it. Thanks very much, Sam. Appreciate you coming.